The final phase of the war began when humanity launched something that had never been attempted in the history of warfare on Earth. Every resistance group on the planet coordinated a simultaneous attack against alien positions. It was not just military forces fighting military forces. It was an entire species rising up at once to say that they would never be slaves. Admiral Nancy Brooks commanded the naval operations, while General Chris Taylor coordinated ground forces. But the real power behind the offensive came from civilian leaders like union organizer Mike Rodriguez and small business owner Janet Parker. These ordinary people had learned to organize their communities in ways that no military academy had ever taught. They understood that this war was not being fought by soldiers alone, but by every human being who refused to surrender their freedom. The attack began at dawn on a Tuesday morning, exactly 3 weeks after the aliens had first appeared. In every time zone around the world, humans struck at alien positions with everything they had built, learned, and improvised during the occupation. The aliens had expected human resistance to weaken over time as the reality of their technological superiority became clear. Instead, they discovered that human resistance had grown stronger and more sophisticated every day. In New York, demolition expert Pete Adams brought down 3 skyscrapers that aliens had converted into command centers. The buildings fell with surgical precision, trapping alien forces inside while leaving neighboring structures untouched. In London, teenager Emma Davis and her team of electronics enthusiasts shut down an entire alien communication hub using electromagnetic pulse devices built from television parts and car batteries. Dr. Rick Thompson's biological weapons proved devastatingly effective during the coordinated assault. Alien forces that had seemed invulnerable to conventional weapons found themselves incapacitated by Earth's own ecosystem. Bacteria, mold spores, and even common allergens became weapons that the aliens had no defense against. Their advanced medical technology could not protect them from biological threats they had never encountered before. The psychological impact of the offensive was even more significant than its military effects. For 3 weeks, alien soldiers had been slowly losing confidence in their mission as they witnessed human acts of mercy and sacrifice. When the final assault began, many Zephyrian troops discovered that they no longer had the will to fight effectively against an enemy that had shown them more kindness than their own empire ever had. Marine Sergeant Tom Bailey found himself in the most important firefight of his career when his unit surrounded Commander Vextar's personal command post in Central Park. The alien commander and his elite guard were trapped with no hope of escape or rescue. Bailey's forces had overwhelming superiority and could have simply eliminated the alien leadership. What happened next would change the course of the entire conflict. Dr. Jennifer Adams, a civilian volunteer who had been providing medical support to Bailey's unit, made a decision that shocked everyone present. Instead of allowing the military to capture or kill the alien commander, she walked into the open area between the two forces and offered Vextar something that no conquered species had ever offered before: safe passage home in exchange for leaving Earth forever. The offer made no military sense. Capturing or killing the alien commander would have been a devastating blow to enemy morale. But Jennifer understood something that pure military thinking could not grasp. The goal was not to defeat the aliens in battle. The goal was to make them understand that humans could never be conquered because they possessed something that no technology could overcome. Commander Vextar stared at the human doctor who was offering him mercy when she could have demanded his surrender. In 47 previous conquests, no enemy had ever offered quarter to Zephyrian forces. They had either fought to the death or surrendered unconditionally. This offer of safe passage was completely outside his experience and his understanding of how warfare was supposed to work. For the first time since the invasion began, Vexitar allowed himself to truly see the humans as something other than primitive animals to be enslaved. He realized that he was facing a species that fought not from hatred or fear, but from love of something greater than themselves. They were not fighting to destroy their enemies, but to protect their freedom. This distinction made all the difference in the world. The alien commander looked around at his guard, who were waiting for his orders to fight to the death. Then he looked at the human forces surrounding them, who were also waiting for orders. Finally, he looked at Dr. Adams, who stood in the open space between them, offering something that should not have been possible, according to everything he knew about war and conquest. Vexitar made a decision that would end his military career and change his life forever. He activated his communication system and broadcast a message to every Zephyrian ship in Earth's atmosphere. He ordered an immediate ceasefire and began preparations for complete withdrawal from Earth. His words were heard by every alien soldier on the planet and by every human resistance fighter monitoring alien communications. The broadcast sent shockwaves through the Zephyrian fleet. Junior officers questioned the order while senior commanders demanded explanations. But Vexitar's authority was absolute, and his reputation for military excellence was unquestioned. If he was ordering a retreat, there had to be compelling reasons that other commanders might not understand. Vexitar's explanation to his fellow commanders was recorded and would later become one of the most studied documents in Zephyrian history. He reported that Earth was unsuitable for conquest due to what he termed indigenous species psychological incompatibility with slavery. He stated that the human population possessed characteristics that made them impossible to control through traditional means. The real reasons for Vexitar's decision went much deeper than his official report suggested. Over the course of 3 weeks, he had watched his soldiers become infected with human ideas about mercy, sacrifice, and individual worth. He had seen the effect that human kindness had on Zephyrian troops who had never experienced such treatment from an enemy. He realized that his forces were no longer truly Zephyrian in their thinking. More importantly, Vexitar had begun to question the fundamental principles that justified Zephyrian conquest. For centuries, his people had believed that advanced civilizations had the right to enslave primitive ones. But the humans had demonstrated that technological advancement was not the only measure of civilization. They had shown that moral advancement might be even more important. As the alien ships began their departure procedures, something unprecedented happened throughout the Zephyrian fleet. Soldiers who had served the Empire faithfully for decades began questioning orders for the first time in their lives. Some requested permission to remain on Earth to study human society. Others asked whether previous conquests had been justified if the conquered species possessed the same capacity for love and sacrifice that humans had demonstrated. The withdrawal took 3 days to complete. During that time, human resistance. Fighters maintained their positions but made no aggressive moves against the departing aliens. Medical teams led by Dr. Kate Morgan even provided treatment for wounded alien soldiers who needed care before they could safely travel. This final act of mercy completed the transformation that had been occurring in alien minds throughout the conflict. On the final day, as the last Zephyrian ship prepared to leave Earth's atmosphere, Commander Vexitar took one last look at the planet his forces had failed to conquer. He realized that the humans had accomplished something far more significant than simply resisting invasion. They had forced an entire alien civilization to confront the moral foundations of their empire. The departure was witnessed by billions of humans around the world. In New York, construction worker Anna Lewis stood next to former banker Doug Harrison as they watched the alien ships disappear into space. The two had worked together throughout the resistance, learning that their differences in background and social class meant nothing when freedom was at stake. Children played in the streets as the ships vanished from view. Their laughter was a sound that would stay with Vex Tar for the rest of his life. He had conquered worlds where the sounds of children playing had been silenced forever. On Earth, those sounds had continued even during the darkest days of the invasion. The children had never stopped believing that their parents and neighbors would protect them. The failed invasion changed Earth in ways that would last for generations. The unity that had formed during the resistance did not disappear when the aliens left. Humans had learned that they could work together across all boundaries when something important was at stake. They had discovered that ordinary people could accomplish extraordinary things when they chose to act with courage and compassion. The global communication networks that had been built during the resistance became the foundation for new forms of international cooperation. The scientific breakthroughs that had been made under pressure led to advances in medicine, technology, and environmental protection. Most importantly, humans had learned something about themselves that they had never fully understood before. As the war entered its second week, the Zephyrians discovered something that no species in their empire's history had ever shown them. Humans fought harder the more desperate their situation became. Every defeat seemed to make them stronger instead of weaker. Every loss seemed to increase their determination instead of breaking their spirit. Dr. Rick Thompson had been a small-town veterinarian before the invasion began. He knew how to treat sick animals, not how to wage biological warfare against alien invaders. But Rick understood something about Earth's ecosystem that became crucial to human survival. Every living thing on the planet had evolved together over millions of years, creating a complex web of biological relationships that aliens could never hope to understand. Working with artist Sarah Martinez, who had a surprising talent for biochemistry, Rick began developing weapons that used Earth's own biological diversity against the invaders. They discovered that many of Earth's microorganisms were completely alien to Zephyrian biology. Bacteria that were harmless to humans and other Earth life forms proved devastating to alien physiology. Sarah's artistic background gave her a unique perspective on biological systems. She saw patterns in bacterial cultures that trained scientists missed. Her ability to visualize complex relationships helped Rick understand how different Earth organisms could be combined to create effects that were harmless to humans but deadly to aliens. They turned art and science into a weapon that no alien empire could have predicted. The biological weapons Rick and Sarah created were simple but incredibly effective. Mold spores that grew naturally in Earth's damp environments caused severe respiratory problems in alien soldiers. Common soil bacteria that humans encountered every day without thinking about it proved toxic to Zephyrian digestive systems. Even plant pollen, which humans dealt with every spring, could incapacitate alien forces for days. Tony Garcia had spent 15 years managing a factory that made car parts. He understood industrial processes and how to organize workers to produce things quickly and efficiently. When the war started, Tony realized that human manufacturing could be turned into a weapon against technologically superior enemies. The key was not to try to match alien technology, but to overwhelm it with sheer quantity and creativity. Tony's factory began producing thousands of simple devices that could disrupt alien operations. They made electromagnetic pulse generators, using car alternators and copper wire. They created smoke generators that could blind alien sensors. They manufactured caltrops and other simple obstacles that could disable alien vehicles. None of these devices were sophisticated, but there were so many of them that the aliens could not keep up. The genius of Tony's approach was that it used skills and materials that were available everywhere. Other factories around the world copied his designs and improved on them. Soon, millions of simple but effective weapons were being produced in every industrial center on Earth. The aliens found themselves fighting not just human soldiers but human industrial capacity. The most shocking discovery for the aliens came from an unexpected source. Emma Davis was only 16 years old, but she had grown up building electronic devices for science fair projects. When the invasion began, Emma realized that alien technology, despite being incredibly advanced, followed certain basic principles that she understood from her electronics hobby. Emma's breakthrough came when she figured out how to build an electromagnetic pulse device using nothing but household electronics and spare parts from her school's physics lab. The device was crude compared to alien technology, but it worked by exploiting a fundamental weakness in Zephyrian design. Their systems were so sophisticated that they had no protection against primitive interference. When Emma's device was tested against a captured alien scout vehicle, the results exceeded everyone's expectations. The alien ship did not just shut down, it crashed. The electromagnetic pulse had completely fried every electronic system on board. Within hours, Emma's design was being shared through resistance networks around the world. Teenagers and electronics. Enthusiasts everywhere began building their own alien-killing devices. Retired physics professor Bill Henderson became an unlikely teacher of warfare. At 73 years old, Bill had never thought he would be showing young people how to make explosives and disable enemy equipment, but Bill understood chemistry and physics in ways that proved crucial to the resistance effort. Bill's classes were held in basement shelters and abandoned buildings. He taught resistance fighters how to use basic scientific principles to create weapons that could defeat advanced alien technology. He showed them how to make explosives from common household chemicals. He explained how to create chemical reactions that could eat through alien armor. Most importantly, he taught them to think scientifically about warfare. The knowledge Bill shared spread through the resistance networks like wildfire. Soon, resistance fighters everywhere understood how to turn chemistry sets into weapon laboratories. High school science became military training. University physics labs became research centers for anti-alien technology. The aliens found themselves fighting an entire planet that had turned its educational system into a weapon. The most devastating psychological blow to the Zephyrian forces came from human medical personnel. Dr. Kate Morgan had been a trauma surgeon before the war began. When alien soldiers were brought to her hospital with severe injuries, Kate faced a choice that would have been unthinkable to most species. She could let them die, or she could save their lives. Kate chose to save them. She treated wounded alien soldiers with the same care she gave to human patients. When other humans questioned her decision, Kate explained that healing was her purpose, and that purpose did not change just because the patient was an enemy. Her actions were recorded and shared through resistance networks, but they were also monitored by alien intelligence systems. The aliens could not understand Kate's behavior. In their experience, conquered species either served their masters or fought them. They did not provide medical care to invading soldiers who were trying to enslave them. This act of mercy created confusion and doubt among alien forces. Some Zephyrian soldiers began to question whether humans were actually the primitive, selfish creatures their leaders claimed them to be. Lucy Chen was only 8 years old when she performed an act that would be remembered long after the war ended. Lucy was hiding in a shelter with other children when alien soldiers discovered their location. The aliens were preparing to capture the children when Lucy did something extraordinary. She walked up to one of the alien soldiers and offered him half of her sandwich. The alien soldier, whose name was Kefaran, had never experienced anything like this moment. In 40 years of military service across dozens of conquered worlds, no member of an enemy species had ever offered him food. The gesture was so unexpected and so innocent that it broke through every barrier that military training had built in his mind. Kefaran took the sandwich and ate it while Lucy watched with curious eyes. For the first time since the invasion began, an alien soldier saw humans as something other than primitives to be conquered or resources to be exploited. Lucy's simple act of kindness planted a seed of doubt that would grow into something much larger. Commander Vexitar began receiving reports that made no sense according to everything he knew about military conquest. Some of his soldiers were requesting transfers away from Earth. Others were asking questions about the morality of the invasion that no Zephyrian had ever asked before. A few had even suggested that perhaps humans should be left alone instead of being enslaved. These reports terrified Vexitar more than any human weapon could have. Doubt was spreading through his forces like a disease. Soldiers who had never questioned orders were now questioning the entire basis of Zephyrian civilization. The humans were not just resisting physical conquest, they were challenging the fundamental beliefs that held the alien empire together. The commander called an emergency meeting with his senior officers. They discussed the disturbing reports of human mercy toward wounded aliens and the growing questions among their own troops. Some officers suggested that they should simply exterminate the human population and move on to easier conquests. Others worried that such an action would create even more problems among their increasingly reluctant soldiers. Vexitar realized that he was facing a crisis that had never occurred in Zephyrian military history. His forces were becoming infected with human ideas about mercy, sacrifice, and the value of individual life. These concepts were foreign to Zephyrian culture, which valued efficiency, order, and the good of the empire above all else. But humans seemed to value something else entirely, and that something was proving to be contagious. As reports continued to arrive from around the planet, Vexitar began to understand that the humans had already won a victory that no previous species had ever achieved. They had not defeated the Zephyrian military, but they had defeated the Zephyrian certainty that conquest was always justified. They had planted questions in alien minds that could never be unasked. The war was entering a new phase. It was no longer just a conflict. When the 72-hour deadline passed, Commander Vexitar gave the order to begin the invasion. He expected quick victory against a primitive species that had never faced advanced alien technology. What happened instead taught the Zephyrians their first lesson about underestimating humanity. The aliens began with what should have been an overwhelming show of force. Landing craft descended from the massive ships, carrying troops in powered armor that could withstand artillery fire. The Zephyrian soldiers moved with confidence, their forearms allowing them to carry multiple weapons, while their crystalline skin provided natural armor protection. But the humans had prepared surprises that no alien computer had predicted. In New York City, the first alien landing force touched down in Central Park, expecting to face panicked civilians or poorly organized military resistance. Instead, they found themselves in a carefully prepared trap that had been designed by Ordinary. people using ordinary materials. Hacker siblings Alex and Jamie Foster had spent 3 days doing something that should have been impossible. Working from their apartment in Brooklyn, they had managed to penetrate the alien communication networks using techniques that no advanced species would ever expect from primitives. The alien systems were incredibly sophisticated, but also incredibly trusting. They never imagined that someone could hack them using nothing but human creativity and stolen cable television equipment. When the aliens tried to coordinate their landing, Alex and Jamie began feeding false information into their communication systems. Alien squads received orders to attack positions that did not exist. Supply ships were directed to empty coordinates. Most devastatingly, the hackers managed to convince several alien units that they were under attack by other alien units. The result was chaos among forces that were supposed to be perfectly coordinated. Alien soldiers found themselves fighting each other while human resistance fighters attacked from positions the aliens did not even know existed. It was like watching a perfectly orchestrated symphony suddenly turn into a room full of people, playing different songs at the same time. Dr. Linda Barnes had made a discovery that would change everything. As a chemist at Columbia University, she had been studying samples of alien material that had fallen from their ships. What she found was shocking. The advanced alien technology was incredibly vulnerable to Earth's atmospheric conditions. The materials that worked perfectly in space or on other worlds began breaking down much faster than expected when exposed to Earth's unique atmosphere. Linda realized that the aliens had designed their equipment for the sterile environments of space and the controlled atmospheres of their home worlds. They had never had to deal with the complex mix of gases, moisture, and organic compounds that made up Earth's air. Human pollution, which had seemed like a weakness, was actually acting like a slow poison against alien technology. Working with teams of volunteers, Linda began developing ways to accelerate this natural corrosion process. They created simple chemical sprays using ingredients from cleaning supplies and garden centers. When these mixtures made contact with alien equipment, the decay process that normally took weeks happened in minutes. Alien weapons would simply stop working. Vehicle armor would develop holes. Even their communication devices would fail. The resistance effort was coordinated by an unlikely leader. Matt Sullivan had been the CEO of a major corporation before the aliens arrived. He was used to managing complex operations, but he had never tried to organize a guerrilla war. Matt found that his business skills translated surprisingly well to military strategy. He understood logistics, communication, and how to coordinate multiple teams working toward the same goal. Matt established command centers in abandoned subway stations and basement shelters. He made sure that resistance teams had the supplies they needed and that information flowed quickly between different groups. Most importantly, he understood that the humans had to fight differently than the aliens expected. They could not win by being stronger or more advanced. They had to win by being smarter and more unpredictable. Construction worker Pete Adams proved that ordinary work skills could become powerful weapons against alien invaders. Pete had spent 20 years building skyscrapers and bridges, so he understood exactly how to make them fall down. When alien forces tried to establish control points in major buildings, Pete and his teams made sure those buildings became death traps instead of safe havens. Pete's demolition work was surgical in its precision. He could bring down a building so that it fell exactly where he wanted it to fall. When aliens occupied a skyscraper, Pete would collapse it in a way that trapped the alien forces inside while leaving nearby buildings untouched. His teams became legendary for their ability to reshape the urban battlefield in ways that favored human defenders. The aliens had never faced an enemy that could literally change the landscape during a battle. They were used to fighting on stable ground where buildings stayed where they were supposed to stay. Pete's demolition teams turned every city into a constantly shifting maze where the aliens could never be sure that the ground under their feet would still be there in an hour. Grace Parker had evolved from a paramedic into something the aliens had never encountered before. She led teams that did not just treat wounded resistance fighters. They actively infiltrated alien positions to gather intelligence and conduct sabotage operations. Grace discovered that her medical knowledge gave her unique insights into alien biology and technology. When Grace's teams captured wounded alien soldiers, she studied their biology to understand their weaknesses. She learned that Zephyrian physiology was incredibly efficient, but also incredibly specialized. They had evolved on a world with very stable conditions, so they had trouble adapting to the variable temperatures, humidity levels, and air pressure, changes that humans barely noticed. Grace began developing biological weapons using Earth's own ecosystem. She discovered that certain Earth bacteria were harmless to humans but deadly to aliens. Mold spores that humans breathed every day without problems caused severe respiratory distress in Zephyrian soldiers. Even common allergens like pollen could incapacitate alien troops who had no natural immunity to such things. The most devastating blow to alien morale came from something they had never experienced in any previous conquest. Humans showed mercy to their enemies. When alien soldiers were wounded or captured, human resistance fighters provided medical care instead of executing them. This behavior was so foreign to Zephyrian understanding that it caused a crisis of confidence among their forces. Steve Cooper had been a commercial airline pilot before becoming a resistance fighter. He led air operations using civilian aircraft that the aliens initially ignored as harmless. Steve's teams converted crop dusters, news helicopters, and even small private planes into effective combat vehicles. They could not match alien firepower, but they could strike fast and disappear before the aliens could respond. Steve's pilots became masters of hit-and-run tactics. They would attack alien ground forces, cause as much damage as possible, and then vanish into the landscape before alien air support could arrive. The aliens found themselves constantly looking over their shoulders, never knowing when the next attack would come or where it would come from. The psychological impact of these tactics was enormous. Alien soldiers who had conquered dozens of worlds without breaking a sweat found themselves jumping at shadows on Earth. They had never faced an enemy that seemed to be everywhere and nowhere at the same time. It was like fighting ghosts who could hurt you but whom you could never hurt back. Diane Miller had become a symbol of human resistance through her sacrifice. But her capture also gave humans valuable intelligence about alien operations. The aliens kept her alive because they could not understand why she had traded herself for children who were not even related to her. They studied her like a scientific specimen, trying to understand this incomprehensible behavior. What they learned from studying Diane terrified them more than any weapon could have. Humans were capable of caring more about others than about themselves. This was not just individual heroism, it was a species-wide characteristic that made humans fundamentally different from any other species the aliens had encountered. It meant that humans would fight harder for each other than they would fight for themselves. Commander Vexitar received reports that made no sense according to everything he knew about warfare and conquest. His forces were taking heavy casualties, not from superior technology, but from superior motivation. Human fighters seemed to become more dangerous when their friends were threatened. They fought harder when they were losing than when they were winning. The alien commander found himself facing a truth that challenged everything his civilization believed about warfare and conquest. Technological superiority was not enough when fighting an enemy that refused to be defeated. Advanced weapons were useless against fighters who were willing to die for their cause. The Zephyrians had always won through fear and overwhelming force, but humans seemed to be immune to both. As the first day of actual combat ended, Vextar realized that this conquest was unlike anything in Zephyrian history. For the first time the second day brought something the aliens had never seen before in any of their conquests. Instead of chaos and surrender, humans began working together in ways that surprised everyone, including themselves. In Detroit, factory worker Joe Martinez walked into his plant that morning expecting to find panic and confusion. Instead, he found his co-workers already organizing themselves into teams. Joe had worked the assembly line for 15 years and had never been a leader of anything. But when his supervisor asked what they should do, Joe found himself speaking up. He suggested they stop making cars and start making weapons. Within hours, the entire factory had retooled itself to produce improvised armor and weapons using nothing but car parts and determination. Across the country in Silicon Valley, tech entrepreneur Ryan Phillips was doing something even more remarkable. He had spent the night working with programmers from competing companies to create a communication network that the aliens could not shut down. Using old ham radios, satellite phones, and even video game networks, they built a system that connected resistance groups around the world. The aliens had assumed that destroying normal communications would leave humans helpless and isolated. They were wrong. Ryan's network allowed people in Japan to share tactics with people in Brazil. Factory workers in Germany could coordinate with farmers in Australia. For the first time in human history, ordinary people around the world were talking directly to each other without governments or corporations in between. Dr. Amy Rodriguez had not slept since the aliens arrived. She worked with physicist Carl Jensen to study every scrap of data they could gather about alien technology. They discovered something important. The Zephyrian ships used quantum-encrypted command systems that were incredibly advanced, but also incredibly complicated. The aliens had built their technology assuming that no primitive species could ever understand it, let alone interfere with it. Carl had an idea that seemed crazy, but might actually work. If they could create enough random quantum interference, they might be able to confuse the alien systems. It would be like shouting in a library where everyone was trying to whisper. They started building devices using parts from university physics, labs, and electronics stores. In small towns across America, something beautiful was happening. Mary Johnson taught third grade in a town so small, it did not even have a traffic light. When the aliens announced their ultimatum, Mary realized that children would be the most vulnerable if the invasion succeeded. She organized every adult in town to dig tunnels connecting all the houses and schools. They worked day and night, using shovels, picks, and anything else they could find. The tunnel system grew until it connected the entire town underground. Children could move safely from house to house without being seen from above. Other towns heard about Mary's idea through Ryan's communication network and started digging their own tunnels. Soon there were underground networks spreading across rural America like roots of some enormous tree. Danny Wright had served 3 tours in Afghanistan before coming home to work as a security guard. He never thought he would be training civilians to fight, but when the aliens came, people started asking him for help. Danny found himself teaching accountants and shop clerks how to move without being seen and how to strike fast and disappear. The tactics Danny taught were not about winning big battles. They were about making the aliens pay a price for every mile they tried to control. He showed people how to disable vehicles, how to sabotage equipment, and how to make invaders feel like they were never safe. Most importantly, he taught them that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite being afraid. News anchor Katie Bell had reported on wars and disasters for 20 years, but she had never been part of the story before. When the major networks were shut down by alien interference, Katie started broadcasting from a mobile unit that moved from place to place. She told stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. She made sure that everyone knew they were not alone in their resistance. Katie's broadcasts became legendary. She told the story of a group of teenagers who had disabled an alien scout patrol using nothing but fireworks and creativity. She shared the news that a nursing home in Florida had successfully hidden all its residents for 2 days, while alien search teams looked for them. Every story she told reminded people that humans were not helpless victims waiting for salvation. They were fighters who refused to give up. The unity that was forming surprised everyone, including the humans themselves. Gang leaders in Los Angeles, who had been shooting at each other for years, suddenly found themselves working together to protect their neighborhoods. Rival political parties that had spent decades arguing about everything discovered they could agree on the importance of staying free. In Chicago, construction foreman Pete Adams was coordinating with environmental activists who had always opposed his building projects. In New York, Wall Street executives were taking orders from Subway, workers who knew the underground tunnels better than anyone. Social media influencers worked with elderly veterans who remembered how to organize communities without computers. Commander Vextar watched the human responses from his command ship and felt something he had never experienced before during a conquest: confusion. Previous species had always reacted to his ultimatum in predictable ways. They either surrendered immediately or fought briefly before surrendering. The humans were doing neither. The Zephyrian military doctrine was based on overwhelming technological superiority, followed by quick psychological domination. Fear was supposed to paralyze the enemy population while their leaders bargained for the best terms they could get. But the humans seemed to be getting more organized and more determined as time went on. This was not how conquests were supposed to work. Vextar called a meeting with his subordinate commanders. They reviewed intelligence reports from monitoring stations around the planet. The data was disturbing. Instead of the expected mass panic and social collapse, humans were forming new types of organizations faster than the aliens could track them. Resistance groups were appearing in places the aliens had not even known were inhabited. The psychological profile of humans that Zephyrian scientists had developed was proving to be completely wrong. The aliens had expected a species that was selfish, cowardly, and easily controlled. Instead, they found creatures who seemed to become braver and more selfless when threatened. It was like discovering that prey animals turned into predators when cornered. Grace Parker had been a paramedic before the aliens came. She was used to helping people in their worst moments, but she had never had to sneak past alien patrols to do it. When traditional hospitals became too dangerous, Grace organized mobile medical teams that could treat injured resistance fighters and then disappear before alien forces arrived. Grace's team saved hundreds of lives in those first few days. More importantly, they proved that humans could take care of each other even under impossible conditions. Her medical teams became symbols of hope. People knew that even if they were hurt fighting the aliens, someone would be there to help them. Most shocking thing for the Zephyrians was witnessing human compassion in action. When kindergarten teacher Diane Miller learned that aliens had captured a group of children from a nearby school, she did something that broke every rule of military logic. She walked up to the alien guards and offered to trade herself for the children's freedom. The aliens were so surprised by this behavior that they actually made the trade. Diane knew she was probably going to die, but she also knew the children would live. Her sacrifice was recorded by hidden cameras and broadcast through Ryan's network. Within hours, millions of humans had seen proof that their species cared more about protecting the innocent than about protecting themselves. As the deadline approached, it became clear that something unprecedented was happening. The humans were not surrendering, but they were also not fighting in any way the aliens understood. They were doing something the Zephyrians had no experience with. They were becoming more human in response to the threat, not less. They were choosing to stand together instead of falling apart. Commander Vextar realized he might have made a serious mistake. He had assumed this would be a simple conquest of a primitive species. Instead, he was facing something his empire had never encountered before. A species that seemed to grow stronger when threatened. A species that valued freedom more than safety. A species that was willing to die for strangers. The 72-hour deadline was almost over, and the humans showed no signs of surrender. Vextar prepared his forces for what he assumed would be a brief military action, followed by the usual occupation and enslavement. He had no idea that the real war was just beginning. The morning started like any other Tuesday until the shadows fell across New York City. Jake Morrison was drinking his coffee in the White House when his aide burst through the door with a face white as paper. The man could barely speak as he pointed toward the window. Jake looked up and saw something that made his blood freeze. Massive ships hung in the sky like dark clouds that would never move. The ships were everywhere. London had 3 of them. Tokyo had 5. Moscow, Paris, Berlin, and every major city on Earth suddenly found themselves under alien shadows. The ships were huge, easily the size of small cities, and they made no sound at all. They just floated there like they owned the sky. Dr. Amy Rodriguez was in her lab at NASA when the alerts started coming in. She ran to the observation deck and stared up at the closest ship hovering over Washington. The thing was beautiful in a terrifying way. It looked like someone had carved a mountain from black crystal and taught it how to fly. Strange lights pulsed along its surface in patterns that hurt to look at for too long. General Lisa Hayes was in a meeting when every phone in the Pentagon started ringing at once. Within minutes, she was in the Situation Room staring at satellite feeds from around the world. The images all showed the same thing. Giant alien ships had appeared without warning and without any way to explain how they got there. Earth's most advanced radar systems had detected nothing until the ships were already in position. On the alien command ship above New York, Commander Vextar studied the planet below through eyes that saw far more than human vision could detect. His 4 arms moved across control surfaces that responded to his thoughts as much as his touch. His crystalline skin caught the light from the ship's systems and threw it back in rainbow patterns. This was his 47th world conquest, and he expected it to be as easy as all the others. The Zephyrians had been watching Earth for decades through intercepted television and radio signals. They had seen the wars, the poverty, the constant fighting between nations and peoples. They had watched humans destroy their own environment and each other with equal enthusiasm. It was clear to them that this species was weak, divided, and ready for conquest. The only question was how many slaves they could take before the population became too damaged to be useful. Admiral Paul Carter stood on the deck of the USS Enterprise as it sailed toward New York Harbor. He could see the alien ship hanging over, Manhattan like a sword waiting to fall. His sailors gathered on deck, all of them staring up at something that should not exist. Some of them were crying, others just stood in silence. All of them knew their world had changed forever. President Morrison appeared on television 3 hours after the ships arrived. He sat behind his desk in the Oval Office, but everyone could see the alien ship through the window behind him. His words were calm, but his hands shook as he spoke. He told the American people that contact had been made with an alien species. He said the government was working to understand their intentions. He did not mention that every attempt to communicate had been ignored. The aliens finally spoke at exactly noon Eastern Time. Every television, radio, and internet connection on Earth suddenly carried the same signal. The voice that spoke was artificial, translated by alien computers into every human language at once. The words were simple and clear, and left no room for misunderstanding. Commander Vextar's message was broadcast to every human on the planet simultaneously. His translated voice was cold and mechanical as he explained that Earth now belonged to the Zephyrian Empire. He said that humans had 72 hours to surrender completely. The terms were simple. Earth would provide 100 million humans to serve as slaves in Zephyrian mines and factories. In exchange, the remaining population would be allowed to live under Zephyrian rule. To demonstrate their power, the aliens did something that terrified every military leader on Earth. Every nuclear weapon in every country simply stopped working. Missile silos that had been armed and ready for decades suddenly contained nothing but dead metal. Submarines carrying nuclear torpedoes found their weapons had become expensive paperweights. The aliens had somehow reached into the most secure facilities on Earth and turned off humanity's most powerful weapons without anyone noticing. Dr. Rodriguez worked frantically with her team to analyze the alien broadcast signal. She discovered that the transmission had somehow used Earth's own communication networks in ways that should have been impossible. The aliens had not just overpowered human technology, they had made it work for them. It was like watching someone else play your piano better than you ever could. As if shutting down the nuclear arsenal was not enough, the aliens gave a demonstration of their destructive power. A small military base in Nevada was chosen for the display. The base housed 2,000 soldiers and had been preparing for possible alien contact. At exactly 3 p.m, the base simply vanished. There was no explosion, no fire, no debris. One moment it existed, and the next moment there was only empty desert. Satellite images showed a perfectly circular hole in the ground where the base had been. British Prime Minister Helen Clark was the first world leader to suggest resistance. During an emergency session of the United Nations, she stood before representatives from every nation and spoke words that would be remembered forever. She said that humanity had faced extinction before and had always found a way to survive. She said that freedom was worth more than life and that slavery was worse than death. Japanese Premier Kenji Tanaka agreed with Clark's position. He reminded the assembly that his nation had rebuilt itself from nuclear destruction and had learned that the human spirit could not be broken by any weapon. He said that surrender to the aliens would mean the end of everything that made humans human. Other leaders were not so brave. The president of France suggested that perhaps 100 million volunteers could be found to save the remaining billions. The Prime Minister of Canada wondered aloud if alien rule might actually improve life for most humans. Fear was spreading as fast as courage, and the unity that Clark and Tanaka called for seemed impossible. Commander Vexitar watched the human debates through intercepted communications and was amused by their primitive emotional responses. In his experience, conquered species always went through the same stages. First came denial, then anger, then bargaining, and finally acceptance. The humans were still in the denial stage, but they would move through the others quickly enough. They always did. The 72-hour countdown had begun. Around the world, humans looked up at the alien ships and wondered if they were seeing their last sunset as a free species. Some people panicked and tried to flee to remote areas. Others gathered in churches and temples to pray. Many simply went about their daily lives because they could not process the enormity of what was happening. But something else was happening too. Something the aliens had not seen before in their previous conquests. Instead of falling apart, some humans were coming together. Factory workers in Detroit started organizing neighborhood defense groups. Teachers in small towns began planning ways to hide children. Ordinary people who had never thought of themselves as heroes began to act like the future of their species depended on them, because it did.